Latin, an ancient language with over 2,000 years of history, has left a profound and lasting legacy that transcends time and continues to shape our society today. In this documentary, we will uncover how this language, originating from a small central region of Italy, managed to spread throughout the vast Roman Empire, diversify into dialects, and evolve into the modern Romance languages we know today. The trajectory of Latin reflects not only linguistic changes, but also the major social, political, and cultural transitions that marked the course of Western history. Join us on this journey through time and discover how, even after the fall of Rome, Latin remained alive, adapting to new contexts and directly influencing the development of languages spoken by millions. Our story begins in the region of Latium, a fertile and strategic area located in the heart of the Italian peninsula. In the 8th century BC, Rome was still a small village of shepherds and farmers, and Latin, spoken by the inhabitants of Latium, was just one of several Italic languages. As part of the Indo-European language family, Latin shared similarities with other languages on the peninsula, such as Oscan and Umbrian, but it was already distinguished by its unique phonology and morphology. The earliest Latin inscriptions, dating back to the 7th century BC, reveal a language still in formation, full of archaisms, with a more elaborate grammar than the Latin that would be consolidated in the following centuries. These early inscriptions were generally of a religious, legal, or funerary nature, giving us a glimpse of how the language was closely tied to the social and spiritual life of the ancient Romans. As Rome grew and expanded, Latin transformed. During the period known as Archaic Latin, from 240 BC to 100 BC, the language began to be used not only for religious and legal records but also for literature. This was the time when the first Roman literary works appeared, such as the comedies of Plautus and Terence, which reflected the Latin spoken in the streets and theaters. These works provide a valuable record of colloquial Latin, showing a living and constantly evolving language, distinct from the more formal forms that would develop in the classical Latin period. The grammar of Archaic Latin was complex, with a robust case system that allowed for great syntactic flexibility and a rich variety of verb forms that would be simplified in later stages. Classical Latin, which spanned from approximately 100 BC to AD 300, marked the peak of Rome's linguistic and literary sophistication. This was the period when the language reached its highest degree of standardization, being used as a vehicle of expression in various fields of knowledge. The writings of figures such as Cicero, Virgil, Horace, and Ovid not only shaped Roman literary style and rhetoric, but also set grammatical standards that would be followed for centuries. The literature, political speeches, and philosophical treatises of this period employed a highly refined Latin, full of figures of speech and complex constructions, which served to demonstrate erudition and persuade the audience. This formal Latin coexisted with Vulgar Latin, the form spoken by common people, which was much less rigid in terms of grammar and vocabulary, reflecting a more dynamic and constantly changing language. Vulgar Latin, although it did not leave extensive literary records, was the language actually spoken by the common folk, soldiers, and peasants of the Roman Empire. It had a simplified grammar with fewer grammatical cases and a less structured syntax. It was a language in constant adaptation, incorporating vocabulary from other local languages with which it came into contact, especially in the empire's provinces. Vulgar Latin was the main agent in spreading the language throughout the empire, as Roman legions and settlers brought their own way of speaking, which blended with the indigenous languages of the conquered regions. In the provinces, Latin not only absorbed local words but also influenced and transformed existing languages, creating a linguistic substrate that would mark the future Romance languages. As the Roman Empire expanded, Vulgar Latin underwent a process of diversification. In Gaul, for example, the influence of Gaulish introduced phonetic and lexical changes in spoken Latin, while in Hispania, Celtic and Iberian languages left their marks on the vocabulary and pronunciation. In Dacia, Latin came into contact with Thraco-Dacian languages, and in North Africa it coexisted with Berber languages. These influences varied from region to region, creating distinct dialects that began to differ from the classical Latin used in administration and literature. In more remote regions, such as Brittany, where contact with Celtic traditions was intense, Latin absorbed not only vocabulary but also linguistic structures that made its pronunciation and grammar different. With the fall of the Western Roman Empire in AD 476, political fragmentation and the ensuing instability accelerated the process of linguistic diversification. The weakening of central authority in Rome and the lack of effective communication between the provinces contributed to the isolation of various communities, leading the local dialects of Vulgar Latin to evolve in different ways. The presence of Germanic peoples and other invaders, such as the Visigoths, Franks, Lombards, and Vandals, brought new influences, incorporating words and altering the phonetics of local Latin variants. This period was marked by a gradual simplification of grammar, in which Latin's complex case system was abandoned and verb forms became more regular. The sounds of the language also changed, with the palatalization of certain consonants and the reduction of diphthongs to simpler sounds, making spoken Latin increasingly distinct from written classical Latin. The emergence of the Romance languages can be observed from the 9th century, when documents like the Oaths of Strasbourg 842 and the Sequence of St. Eulalia 9th century reveal forms of Old French that could no longer be easily understood by a classical Latin speaker. These texts, written in popular languages, are the first indications that Latin had fragmented into distinct regional languages, marking the birth of the Romance languages. From this point on, Portuguese, Spanish, French, Italian, and Romanian began to define themselves as independent languages, each with its own phonetic, lexical, and grammatical characteristics, shaped by different pre-Romanic substrates, such as Iberian, Celtic, and Etruscan, and post-Roman superstrates, such as Germanic and Slavic languages. During the Renaissance, scholars rediscovered classical Latin and sought to revive its pure and original forms, but the Romance languages had already consolidated their own norms and standards. However, Latin continued to be used as a scholarly language in science, law, and the Catholic Church, serving as a universal language of intellectual communication. It was during this time that the first dictionaries and grammars of the Romance languages began to be compiled, and the process of standardizing national languages gained momentum, replacing Latin in official documents and education. Today, the Romance languages continue to evolve, adapting to modern times and absorbing new terms and concepts from other languages, such as English. Regional dialects, like Neapolitan and Sicilian in Italy or Occitan in France, still preserve ancient elements that date back to Vulgar Latin, revealing the rich linguistic diversity that has always characterized the Roman world. Latin, although often considered a dead language, maintains a constant presence in areas such as scientific nomenclature, Catholic liturgy, and legal expressions. Neo-Latin groups continue to promote the use of Latin as a living language, with contemporary publications and events held entirely in Latin. The legacy of Latin goes beyond the words we use daily. It has shaped cultures, influenced philosophy and science, and laid the foundations for many institutions that form modern Western society. The evolution of Latin into the Romance languages is a story of survival and adaptation that reveals humanity's ability to transform language in response to changing circumstances. By tracing the origin of our words and expressions, we can see that Latin still resonates through the centuries, making it clear that, in a way, it never died. Now, we want to know, have you ever noticed any similarities between Latin and the language you speak? Leave a comment and share your opinion with us. Don't forget to like the video if you found this content valuable, subscribe to the channel, and activate the notification bell to follow our upcoming documentaries on the history of ancient Rome. And in the video appearing on the screen, I explain everything about how the Roman Empire became so large and how its expansion unfolded. If you're curious to learn more, just click and check it out.